as for the previous session. They are also going to be our intentions for the next session as well, if you're joining us on March 1st. We're intending to create a space for project teams to learn more about specific topics. We'll talk about those specific topics all day today. We'll create a space for teams to inquire further about their own specific projects. So again, some Q&A time at the end, and then we'll facilitate the continued interaction and networking of BIEC teams in smaller groups. Our objectives are here. I'm not going to read them all out word for word, but I am going to let you take 10 seconds or so to scan them. These are the key questions that we're going to be pursuing today as we hear from our two expert speakers here starting in just a few moments. So I'll give you a moment there. So as the title of our session would suggest, we really are focused on tenant-landlord relationships and agreements and what everybody needs to know to stay BFFs together in those relationships. We're going to hear a lot more about do's and even some lessons learned. Structurally speaking, we've got just a few minutes here in our welcome and overview, and then about 15 to 20 minutes with Amy Friedlander, who's going to introduce herself in just a moment. And then the bulk of our time with Mary Graham, who's a practitioner expert here to talk with us. And then our final 15, 20 minutes are going to be for all of you to ask questions as specific or general as you'd like. So please do keep track of your questions as we go. We'll have time at the end for those. All right, so I would love to share who's in the virtual room on the sort of presentation side of things. I'm up there in the right-hand corner, and you've met Cecile already, and you know her. Bevan, would you like to introduce yourself? We're going to kind of go clockwise then from you.
Great. Hi, everyone. I think most of you know me. I'm Senior Bevan Parker-Churka, Senior Program Officer at LISC. And I think a lot of you know that I am from Philly, so these are some of my local friends. And while we don't have a Philly project in the cohort, I'm really excited to share their experiences with you all today.
Thanks, Bevan. Cindy Larson, how about you?
Hi, everyone. Just like Bevan, I think most of you know me, and we've been here together before, but happy to be here. Cindy Larson from LISC. I'm the Senior Director of Child Care and Early Learning here. I will be mostly quiet this time, unlike other sessions, except perhaps in the question and answer time. But thanks for joining us today. Nice to be here. And I will pass it to Amy.
Thanks, Cindy.
Hi, everybody. My name is Amy Friedlander, and I am an early child education consultant based here in Philadelphia, as Bevan mentioned. I've crossed paths with a few of you by coincidence, as I do have the opportunity to work nationally in all sorts of areas related to early childhood workforce, facilities, business models, etc. So great to see you. Mary?
Sorry. Hi, I'm Mary Graham. As it said, Executive Director in Children's Religion. We're in Philadelphia, and I'll talk more about that later. And I know these folks through their various job duties in supporting the child care community and sustainability. So thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. Thanks, Mary. All right, so without further ado, I'm gonna have Amy take it from here for our next bit of time to really set the context for us and set the stage for our theme today. So Amy, I'm gonna try to read your mind about when to advance, but feel free to prompt me as needed. I'm also gonna adjust my screen here so that I'm seeing you mostly. Okay, great. All right, tally ho, and away we go.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate it. And really, the big idea that I'd like to share with you in my couple of minutes here is just about the unique and symbiotic relationship that child care providers have with their landlords. This is not a typical landlord-tenant relationship. In some ways that are really positive and in some ways that are truly challenging. But childcare programs have an exaggerated impact on a building or on a campus. You know, they're seen, they're heard. Sometimes their kitchens create smells. They're not just behind that office space, that that door that they've rented or leased. They're everywhere, and they really set a wonderful tone throughout the building.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Kidding.
It also means that they really require a lot from a building. So it's not just a classroom or an interior space, but it's really the infrastructure of a building that a child care program really needs. The quality, the availability of water, the availability of sinks and toilets, the water temperature, the access to the parking lot and drop off and pickup. There's so many places where the needs of the child care program in order to operate at a safe and hopefully really high quality level need to be much more in depth. And so as we think about, you know, pursuing these kinds of partnerships and relationships, I think we just really need to keep in mind how there is shared risk and reward between the two parties in a way that is not, again, just not typical. So this is part of the really good news. You know, I would posit that child care programs are great tenants. And as I mentioned in the previous slide, they really are setting a joyful, playful, positive and happy tone. They're seen, they're walking about as they explore the neighborhood or the building and really create a really positive environment. They also make childcare accessible for other tenants in a building or on a campus. So we know that, you know, folks have grown used to working remotely. It makes commuting even, you know, something that maybe it was just dealt with or assumed that we had to struggle through it before. Now folks are thinking there might be another way. How much easier if your commute to work is combined with drop off and pick up for your kids. We know that in this country, while we're very far from defining childcare as a public good, we have a Band-Aid approach to funding, and there are some specialized funding sources, both public and private, that can really support a childcare program in investing in its building. And that can be a building that's leased or a building that's owned. So that's something really positive that a childcare operator can bring. And Mary will speak to that from Children's Village's experience and perspective. There may be tax benefits to landlords for making contributions or forgiving rent or otherwise working with childcare programs, depending on each state or the nonprofit or for-profit status of a particular provider. And then we have one more bonus for what is so great about having childcare as a tenant, and that would be the preference for long-term leases. And sometimes in order for a childcare program to access those grants and loans, they need to be able to show that they have a long-term lease. And we also know that childcare programs really are important members of a community, and their location matters. They want to stay and be multi-generational providers. So that emphasis on stability and staying in the building, staying in the property for decades can be really a valuable asset that childcare programs bring to their landlords. And some of what makes this relationship so unique is the highly regulated nature of childcare. So while, an accounting firm or a legal firm, when they want to lease some space, whatever their regulatory environment is, is highly unlikely to have anything to do with the physical plant of the building itself. That is not true in childcare, where regulatory demands create a lot of unique needs for the building, the facility, the grounds. So we have state licensing regulation. We often, in most states, we have quality rating improvement systems, which also have standards and speak to the physical plant. Programs like Mary's that seek out national accreditation have to meet those standards around the physical plant. We have a federal food program that's regulated at the state level, but that too, speaks to what a kitchen needs to look like and have, and et cetera. And then we know that programs access specialized funding so that they can serve as many different kids and families as possible. And each of those funding programs, like Head Start or Early Head Start, or a public pre-K program, those too may have requirements around the physical plant. And what that does is create a very specific set of needs for providers. And some of those I think we put in the chat box a link to the LISC, the LISC design guide. And many of these are mentioned in that guide. Those are special needs that in effect a child care program has. And those outdoor play areas, the access to, egress points, it's not just parking, but also the ability oftentimes for drop off and pickup. We saw COVID created real chaos for many providers, had to really pivot and think very creatively about how drop off and pickup could be more flexible. We know indoor air quality, again, in COVID, that became a very public and pervasive issue, but it's long been an issue in childcare. Lighting, the level of cleaning, the toilets and sinks, water temperature, all of these issues need to be addressed. And that's the symbiosis, right? So for a landlord can, the child care program wants to hold the program accountable. The landlord has to be accountable for supporting the program and meeting these physical requirements. And the rewards can be the operation of a really high quality program. So we wanted to think about, how do we really get in front of this kind of interdependency? We don't want it to be something that is seen as a burden or seen as just that extra thing that a landlord has to kind of deal with. We really see it as a positive that can be sort of from the perspective of the day-to-day, that partnership between the program and the landlord, and then from the idea of really thinking about the future and how can that partnership get more creative and really build over time. So in order for the day-to-day, that first kind of basic partnership, really want to talk about communication and shared understanding. And how can the program and the landlord start to speak each other's language and understand what are the pressure points that really need to be addressed collaboratively. And then in a more kind of planful and future-oriented way, what can that partnership build that maybe nobody had thought of before? So what other kinds of operations might a child care program be able to pursue, using the space in a creative way, using more space? How might a child care program think about partnering with a landlord or a developer around housing for its frequently poorly compensated teaching staff? So there are some of those kinds of creative options that the basic partnership between a landlord and a program help build the foundation to go in that direction. So one of the biggest pieces is, well, what are these key points of communication that we really want to pursue. And I think the biggest piece of it is the unique and challenging early child education business model. And sort of a kind of crass, the most fundamental way that a landlord might bump into that model is the seasonality and some challenges around cash flow. And again, I think Children's Village has some good examples, and Mary will speak to that issue. But I think the other aspect of this early childhood business model that it's really important for a landlord to understand is that by and large in childcare, bigger is better. It's a more sustainable business model. So to the extent that a landlord can really think about how to maximize space that might be available for a childcare program, that can really help reinforce sustainability for the program. But also all of those infrastructure pieces and the grounds that we talked about, all of those elements in the LISC design guide. The more that the landlord is able to view those as just fundamental to the program's ability to achieve and maintain high quality, and therefore for the program to be able to maximize its appeal to parents and its ability to access multiple funding sources, the more the landlord can be involved in really helping to support the program and to ensuring that mutual reward. The piece, again, that long list of regulations and standards that we had on the slide, as much as a landlord is able to be familiar with and understand those, I think that just leads to a more successful partnership. While landlords by and large might be thinking in square footage, for instance, in early childhood, the licensing entity is dealing with usable space. And every column or every other type of challenge to a teacher being able to keep full eyes on all the children in the classroom is a real problem and can negatively impact the bottom line for the provider. So those are important topics for the program to really try to educate the landlord about. And then again, the more kind of positive, good news about what are those ECE specific funding sources that a program might be trying to pursue and what kind of partnership they might need from their landlord in order to be successful in pursuing that funding. And then I think we've got those tax credits. So again, a landlord may not be so familiar with what is specific to the ECE world. And that's really important information for a provider to share. And then just really briefly thinking about, well, how might that information be communicated? And we know that the most basic kind of agreement that exists between a landlord and a tenant is a lease, and those cover a lot of the nuts and bolts of a relationship. And oftentimes when a broker is involved, there's the leases better understood by both parties. But there are other ways to foster strong communication beyond that lease. And we're particularly thinking about different kinds of agreements based on the new market tax credit model, where there can really be a focus on the kinds of mission and goals of a development project, and how might a childcare program or provider and their landlord work together and just to define the goals that they have in an agreement. Also, I mentioned how it is so beneficial and can be beneficial for other tenants in a building to be able to access childcare for their staff right in the building. And, a landlord can really facilitate that process, introducing a childcare program to other tenants, introducing tenants to the childcare program, and really fostering that idea of a community of tenants, a community of folks on a campus or within one building who can support one another in achieving their own goals. As I mentioned, the lease, very important. And very important that both parties feel they understand that lease and that they have had an ability to air what needs to be in that lease in order for their businesses to benefit and be sustainable. And Children's Village has had experience working with the broker, and Mary's going to speak to us about that, the role of the broker. And one of the handouts that we have for related to this meeting topic does speak to this issue as well. And then just regular ongoing meetings and calls between the child care program and the landlord. Really good idea. Just keeping folks involved in terms of what's coming up, what kind of monitoring visits, licensing windows, site visits might be coming up. The more communication, the better. And this idea of branching out from childcare, again, Children's Village has done some really interesting work in this regard, but I'm trying to think creatively about how a childcare program can both use space that they rent within a building or a campus for purposes somewhat different from their current operations, and also how they might use more space. So offering a childcare provider the right of first refusal to expand is really an important kind of basic first step for really pursuing a long-term partnership between a landlord and a childcare provider. As I mentioned, being bigger is often a means to financial stability for a childcare provider. But there's more than just seats for more kids. There's also the ability to think about using the space for adult training or for community meetings or for sort of an indoor playground, like a big body play area. So I think, once the foundations of a good, solid relationship are established, there's lots of interesting new directions that folks can go.
Thank you so much, Amy. Amy will stick around for Q&A later. So if you have some things that you'd like to follow up with her on, she'll be available for that. But now I'd like to hand it over to Mary Graham, again, the Executive Director of Children's Village here in Philadelphia. For her perspective, she's going to do an overview of Children's Village, talk about their own real estate story, and then go into some detail about other key space usage, things that landlords can keep in mind, and then some challenges and lessons learned. Mary?
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for the invitation today. I think childcare providers are used to being thought of last. We're the forgotten people. Oh yeah, we have to bring them along. And when you hear our story, that's how we were kind of started. We were started in 1976. We were started by another nonprofit, an economic development group that was trying to support the unionized garment industry in Philadelphia. They built this brand new building, and they had on the second floor, they had a garment factory. On the third and fourth floor, they had shops, they had schools. So garment, machine operators could learn how to get trained. And then those who were fixing the machines get trained. And then they had children's apparel mart on the other floors. But they forgot to support the workers. So they had a hard time recruiting employees because many of these employees are women, and guess what? They had children. So we were an afterthought. We were never part of the original project. Luckily, the first floor was available, and they put in a small program for 55 children. And that was how we were started in terms of it was always a private-public partnership. Once the economic development group realized the importance of childcare, they got wholly involved. They got the state to get involved. They got various companies, the unionized garment industry. At the time, Philadelphia had a huge number of department stores. This is pre-mall days. So we had all these huge department stores and Bell Telephone. So it was a really vibrant downtown, and there was buy-in from all of that. But again, it wasn't, they weren't around to start a childcare center. They were there to support businesses. But we know that you can't do that without supporting the employees. So we started with 50 children. We now have a capacity of 500 children. And along the way, it was somewhat fun and a lot of times bumpy. By 1983, the garment industry in Philadelphia had disappeared, the unionized garment industry, and shops were closing down. And guess what? The factory on the second floor went bankrupt. The person who owned the factory also owned the building. So he started to remove the tenants, including us. So we had to start looking for space. But all the other industry, the apparel marts closed, the nonprofit that supported us, they helped us move. So we moved across the street, but we moved into a building that was vacant, an 8-story building, and we took the second and third floors. Now we have the first to 6th floors. And again, when I think about who Children's Village is, being in downtown Philadelphia, we're close to lots of industries that tend to be more labor intensive. We're right next to Chinatown, so there's lots of restaurants. Currently, the garment industry often served the newest immigrants, so there were always different communities we were working with, and now it's largely a lot of Asian families. Over the years, we were successful in getting different types of funding sources. Childcare cannot be paid for wholly by any one individual or any one company, and it's an expensive venture when you think about the amount of funds that you need to support the staff, which is your biggest expense. So we've been able to braid lots of different funding, and that just means that we are able to get more than one source of funding for a child, which helps create high.
Are other folks having trouble with hearing Mary?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mary, if you can hear us, you have frozen up. Mary, can you hear us? Mary?
I think she dropped, so hopefully she'll be able to get back on in a
Okay,
moment.
great. We look for her in the window.
I see her again.
Apologies, my internet, of course, isn't stable today. That's because I need it today. So I told you a little bit about our program and who we serve. We have approximately, now we have a $6 million budget. So it's gotten larger over the years. We can go to the next slide.
And you already started telling some of this story.
So here we are in this 8-story building. On the side of the wall, you see the mural. We get to use every part of the space as possible. So we moved in here, and when I started thinking about this project, I thought of all the other tenants in the building that have come and gone. And that's the most critical point. They've all come, but they've all gone. 12, in fact. There have been gyms, there have been architects, there have been courier companies, there was an MRI, there was another provider of early intervention, there were lots of call centers, there was a Jewish archive, and they come and they don't stay long because it's, real estate is not an easy business. So, and part of it is your location, but we've been able to stabilize the building two of our landlords, we were on, I think, our sixth landlord, and since we moved here in 1985, two of them went completely bankrupt. So the building was sold numerous times, and sometimes at a loss, and sometimes at a profit. Philadelphia likes to have tax credits, so that often encourages landlords to get a building, and then they tend to dump it after a while. But we're in it for the long haul. So next slide. Right now we have 24 classrooms. We've built a commercial kitchen. When I talk about being creative about space, when you look at that building, you saw that it's one large 8-story building and a single 1-story building next to it. Well, we thought, wouldn't it be great to have a play space on the top, on the roof of the 1-story building? And that's what we did. How do you rent the roof? Well, you don't rent the roof. We got an agreement that we had to reinforce the roof. There had to be a lot of construction to build up that roof, put in steel supports, change it and all that. But we don't pay rent, but it's an outdoor play space. We did that before there were mobile towers all over the city. I think now they realized, every landlord that has come and gone realizes they could have made some money off of us, and they're not. So we own that roof. They don't. The other thing that has happened is as we're expanding, we're always updating. So when Amy talked about what we bring to the building, we bring a lot of stability. We want things to work. We need an elevator that works. We need lobby security. We need access to parking. When she talked about how we're using space, one of the latest projects is that we build a learning lab, and we're using it for adults and children. And pre-pandemic, we had a lot of community organizations come in, and we were able to let them use space. We were able to convene meetings, and we will do that again. It is also where Amy and I have done business trainings. Next, and you see the kitchen. So as she said earlier, yeah, sometimes you do smell broccoli, and we try not to cook cabbage that much. And sometimes it makes people hungry, and other times it doesn't. But you always know the kids are eating healthy. Next slide. So what have we added to the landlord? Well, just in terms of what we've added more than $5 million worth of improvements. And this is stuff that technically is ours, but we can't take it. I can't take all of the plumbing that we had to have created when we expanded, because plumbing was only on one side of the building and not on the other. And it was important to have bathrooms and classrooms. So we spent a lot of money on that. We changed all of the lighting. We went from, fluorescent lighting to LED lighting, gotten some credits for that. We've had them get tax credits for changing the HVAC system. As I said, we improved the roof, all new flooring. And technically we can't take that with us, even though it's ours. So we've really made the building much nicer looking, both inside and out. We really like to make sure that it's pleasant and it's always clean. We are the ones that will be saying, hey, you can't have any trash outside. This is really critical. You have to keep this clean. You have to make sure the sidewalks are done. So we've added value to the landlord, despite the folks that they really want to think that we're just, we're not the best tenant, but in fact, we have been. Initially, when we did our leases, we didn't have a broker, and we really got the short end of the deal. We ended up having so much money and charges and CAM charges. I didn't know anything about base rate, year rents, and taxes and all of that. I've learned a lot, but I've learned to use a broker. And it was interesting. There was a time, and this happens when we see it now, that there's a glut of real estate space in downtown areas. And we were on 4 floors, and the early intervention program that was in there, I forgot about them. That was tenant number 13. They moved out, and that space sat empty for 3 years, and it was set up as, for classrooms. And the landlord kept saying, do you want to rent it? And I'm like, nope. because the rent was too high. We got an opportunity to expand. He was having difficulty renting that space because, again, it was set up as classrooms. It would take a lot of demolition. So I went to him in June and says, with a broker, and we ended up getting another long-term lease, paying less for 5 floors than we did for 4 floors, and locking into rents for the long term. And that's happened each time we've used a broker. We've been able to negotiate whether or not, when we're moving, who does the fit out? Does the landlord do the fit out, or do we get the credits for it? And child care centers don't know this, but we're teaching them that when other tenants renew leases, they get new painting, they get new rugs. Well, we want to do that ourselves. So using a real estate broker has been extremely helpful, especially since I don't have to pay them. They get paid by the owner, and landlords don't like them. So when we have issues of difficulty, I sometimes will say, well, do I have to call in the broker? And they're like, no, because they don't like that. Next paragraph, next slide. And we always do make sure that we are negotiating our leases 3 years before the end of it. We have really made a lot of time to build the relationship with the landlord. It's wonderful when it works great, and it's horrible when the landlord has other interests than you. That's the time, at least for us as a nonprofit, we use our board to help with, bad publicity, and nobody wants to kick out a child care center. It doesn't look good. News doesn't like to hear that. But as a nonprofit, we can help them get tax credits. So and it depends state to state, and I know that, but I know in Pennsylvania, they can get tax credits for construction that they give to a school. So if they do the fit out, they can get the tax credits for that. So the child care center just has to know that they bring value. They're value added to a facility. And we've been able to attract better tenants. When, it's interesting because when the landlords will say, oh, we're running to this, I'm like, well, that person's going to last for 3 months, and it's pretty accurate. And here's the type of facility, program or company that you want in there, something that complements the building. It really does make it an active, more active space. But as Amy said, it is louder, but it is happy. So we have to think about the positives of that. Next slide. Are there special challenges? Yes, absolutely. Water temperature is a big thing in childcare. It has to be the right temperature because there's archaic plumbing codes, at least in Philadelphia, that say it can't be this much. And then regulation says it has to be this high, and they're conflicting. So you just have to figure out how to do that. But you have to explain that to the landlord. You have to explain that things such as, we're going to use the building a lot more. We have hundreds of children come in every day, in and out. We use the elevator all the time. We use the doors all the time. You have to make sure you have door guards. You just can't, we're always talking about safety and concern. Our building at one time, the landlord wanted to spruce it up. So he put these big planters out front on either side of the doors with these artificial trees, which I don't know why artificial. They could have had real trees, but they became deposits for the people who were going to the police roundhouse. Tasers, guns, knives. Our neighbors often attract different type of clientele. So I kept saying, well, you really shouldn't have that planter there because it's the right height level, and that there's other ways you can make the place look nicer. Please don't put, different types of flowers and plants in the lobby because many of them are, poisonous to children. We have to talk about airflow. I don't know how many tenants often ask them, can you tell us about the airflow? What's your, and I forget all the terms, I will remember them, but the real estate broker always knows that about the air exchange and make sure it's this and that. We also have to talk about how having 80 children on the floor the needs for heating and air conditioning are very different as opposed to having 10 adults on the floor. So those systems get stressed. So we have to be able to say to them, you have to make sure you have to upgrade them. And then there's other things like cleaning. I learned through negotiations that landlords usually estimate that they'll pay $1 a square foot for the cleaning company. Well, in childcare, it's going to be more like $5 a square foot. And for a long time, we had the building pay for the cleaning company, and I got to be supervising the cleaning company about the work that they weren't doing. And finally, after years of doing that, I said, you have to decrease our rent because we're going to take over the cleaning and we're not going to bother you. And it was a win-win because they didn't want to hear me complain about, floors and toilets and smelly places. So they worked with that. Same thing with pest control. We serve more meals than most restaurants in Philadelphia. Having at our height of enrollment, it was 425 children with 2 meals a day and a snack a day. That's a lot of food in and out. So we have to make sure that there's good trash removal. We've also had to deal with lots of utility issues and things like that, but we always are able to work it out. In childcare, we can't be without toilets, even for an hour. So we can be in a building without heat, but we can't be in our building without electricity because that's how the toilets work. Lots of landlords don't know that. Next slide. The other thing that, and again, Amy alluded to it, is the cash flow. We will always pay our rent, but we will always have a hard time paying rent in the fall. Saying that at the very beginning of your relationship with the landlord was really, really important. And they know that we will pay, we're good for it. They're not going to evict us. And I know when we do business classes, people say, oh, didn't you pay the rent? I'm like, no, who's going to evict a childcare center? We pay our taxes, we pay our staff, taxes, benefits, and cleaning. They're the 5 things that we pay because utilities aren't going to be cut off. But as long as the landlord knows that, and then also they can get some tax credits too. They have other companies. Many of the landlords have other companies that they can use, and they can support the rent through a tax credit. So next slide. Lessons learned: always use a broker, and don't think of the childcare centers as being the afterthought. You're the center of the building. You can be the energy of the building. You can be the hub of the building. Now, should you own the building? It depends. Are you a nonprofit or for-profit? Are you going to have all the space? Frankly, I know what I'm like as a tenant, and I would not want to be dealing with a tenant like me. And we have 2 empty floors. There's 2 other floors in our building. By the way, when we took the 6th floor, the landlord, even the current landlord was playing this, oh, I have another tenant, they want it. And I'm like, well, I have right of first refusal. You have to give me this time till I get the grant. Why don't you give them the 8th floor? And suddenly there was no tenant. That 8th floor is still vacant. Maybe we'll come up with a use for it someday, but whatever. It's also a way to attract other nonprofits. But again, I don't want to own the building. You would have to, for us, we would have to set up another company, another, nonprofit or for-profit. But every childcare provider is different, and every real estate area is different. We're talking about downtown Philadelphia, where we can't go out, but we can go up. In rural areas, they can go out. So I think it really has to be specific. All right, what other lessons have we learned?
Hold on just one second, Mary. So I know Cecile put in a resource in the chat about purchasing versus leasing. Did someone from LISC want to add to the conversation in this regard, or shall we keep moving?
Bevan, should we own our building?
I went through I just remember going through this with you, Mary, and we did the numbers, and you should not have owned the building.
Yeah, when Bevan was at her other job, she ran it and was like, she convinced my board, like, you would be bankrupt very soon if you tried to own this building. Yeah.
But this is where CDFIs in your local communities or LISC can be really helpful partners, you know, and being those third party sort of helpers to do that assessment for you. And then, you know, if it is the path to pursuing a purchase, there's loan opportunities available there. So, I mean, lean in on the technical assistance available through some of those entities for sure.
Great. Thank you.
I learned a lot about what the importance of having the landlord replace something as opposed to repairing something. When there's a repair of the air conditioning unit, the HVAC unit, we as part of our lease have to pay for a portion of that as part of CAM charges. But if they replace it, they can't charge us. And I know that information now because I've learned the hard way. So I can say to the landlord, as I've had said to this landlord, we're not going to pay for any more repairs. You can't charge us. You either replace it or you assume all the repairs. And we need heat and air conditioning because that's part of our lease. So we've gotten new HVAC systems. They still have like 6 more to replace, but we'll get them. But it is important to know what your rights are as the tenant and what they can and can't charge. Next, what else have I learned? Childcare directors have to end up being a GM or general contractor at times. It takes time. Even if you have a building person who's managing the construction, it always takes time. It takes time of the staff, whether or not it's to deal with the subcontractors or the contractors and their questions, or it deals with how it impacts the families and children. We've done renovations in all different ways. We've done them during the day when we're still on site, and half the floor is occupied and the other half is being built out. It's a little loud. It gets very messy, but it was cheaper for us to do it that way. This last renovation, since the expansion we were able to do during COVID. Who else expands during a pandemic? Well, childcare people. I signed the lease. I signed the agreement. Nobody told me about COVID, but it worked out fine because the floors that they were renovating, we occupied the other floors, so it didn't impact us at all. And they were able to get the work done, and they were able to get it done really quickly. Now, when we had to renovate the existing 5 floors, we had to do that at night and on the weekends. It is overtime. It is a second shift. One of the things I've learned is it's not just having a relationship with the landlord, but you have to get to know a really good contractor who will put up with the craziness that childcare people have to deal with. They know you can't use that type of outlet. You need to have this. No, this has to be here. And you educate the contractor, and there's lots of work for them later. You got to know a good plumber, because plumbers spend a lot of time taking Legos out of toilets and everything else out of toilets. So you just have to figure that out. You also have to figure out the conflicting regulations. Can you do it during the day? Earlier, as I said, you can't purchase regular cleaning as part of your lease or regular HVAC services because it's a lot more is needed. And sound absorption is really key because we make a lot of noise. Nobody wants the childcare center to be on top of them because kids running back and forth makes a lot of noise. So I know lots of times landlords want to keep the first floor vacant for businesses. Once that childcare center is on the second floor, they're ready to give it to you. I mean, maybe that's how I got the first floor because on the second floor we're just so loud, but it worked. And it also gives us a lot of leverage when we're negotiating. Nope, we're not going to move out of the first floor. So I'm not sure if I have any more slides. Ingrid?
You did it, Mary.
Okay, I did it. I might have forgotten half the things since I had to move my office and I'm standing in somebody else's office.
You're good. No, you're good.
Yeah. Oh, the
Um,
other thing we've improved, I forgot, this
Please.
building, internet stable, other than in my office. We've spent, just last year, we spent $75,000 that we got paid for by a company, PNC Bank, paid to have all of the internet and telephone services. I can't take that wiring when I go.
mhm.
The building is very happy. They've gotten a really nice building out of this, certainly better than it was 35 years ago.
Mhm. Well, thank you for highlighting that mutual benefit. So we understand some people might have to leave at the top of the hour in about 5 minutes. That's totally fine, but we are going to stick around till about 10 or even quarter past the hour.